Oh dear. Ooh, oh, chilly. Okay, it's what 10:30 here in the UK. So good morning from me. Obviously, very busy weekend in sport. Two managerial sackings in the Premier League, and obviously Everton have been found guilty of their financial fair play breaches as well. So that is something to bear in mind. Obviously, Leicester City parting ways with Brendan Rodgers, and Chelsea parting ways with Graham Potter. Um, Two managers that I think, yeah, those sackings make a lot of sense. I feel sorry for Graham Potter. In Brendan Rodgers' situation, I think his race was run at Leicester at the beginning of the season. We could argue whether both clubs have acted too late to change the course of their seasons, but both those managers have fallen by the wayside. Now, the Everton situation may actually have a bearing on the final league table. There's a potential of a points deduction. There is the potential of a transfer embargo, and there is the potential of a fine. Now, obviously, if Everton stay up, then that leads to potential legal challenges. They could start next season with points deduction. The Premier League is very adverse to bringing in points deductions for clubs. Uh, so that becomes very interesting. I believe only Portsmouth are the only club to have a points deduction for financial issues. I believe Bolton are a club that have had a points deduction for failure to fulfil a fixture. So when it comes to financial breaches, Portsmouth are the only club to ever had a points deduction in the Premier League era. Now, if this is the Football League, for example, obviously we've seen Reading this season, and we've seen other clubs in previous seasons have points deductions and transfer embargoes in place for breaches of financial fair play. Obviously, the Manchester City side of things is still ongoing as well, and that will be a much longer, drawn-out process in regards to any potential punishment that Manchester City may or may not face. So that's an ongoing situation. Who replaces Brendan Rodgers and who replaces Graham Potter, we will wait and see on permanent placements at those clubs. Obviously, Tottenham have parted ways with Conte as well, so three managers in a week in the Premier League is a bit extreme. We've seen 11. I believe it's 11 managerial changes in the Premier League this season. That's over half the league have changed managers. Some clubs have changed manager more than once, as in Chelsea's case. They obviously sacked Tuchel and sacked Potter. And there's a lot of frustration with Chelsea fans aimed at Todd Bowley, the owner, and a lot of criticism of his ownership style and how he's running the club and the transfer policy. Leicester, I think the criticism, there was a lot of fans disappointed with their transfer dealings over the last year since the summer transfer window and some of Brendan Rodgers' tactical selections and how the team been performing all season. The pressure's been on Brendan Rodgers since the start of the season. There's been a growing frustration with fans at Leicester City in the direction their club is taking. So there's been a lot of managerial changing. But in the modern day, you get hired to get fired. No manager is unsackable. I think Jurgen Klopp is under a lot of pressure, and I think if their summer transfer targets aren't met, and if they have a poor start to next season, I think Jurgen Klopp could be out of a job as well. The whole Man City situation with Guardiola that has gone quiet, but he did make a statement saying that if the club is found guilty of the breaches and punished, he will walk. So there's a lot of undercurrent here. No manager is unsackable. No manager is unsackable. So bear that in mind. Um, Now, obviously, I did some research into the channel and where people are viewing from. And the most popular cities, as I say, were Dublin and Auckland, and not London. So London was the third city, but Dublin and Auckland are the most popular cities people view from around the world, which I found really interesting and not overly surprising, but interesting considering like the sports that we cover, the leagues that we cover, and it the fact that Dublin and Auckland are in the top 10 doesn't surprise me. The fact that the top two does. I'm really surprised by some of the US cities not appearing in the top 50, apart from Vegas. Vegas, I think, was the highest ranked American city, and that does surprise me. Still, I'm surprised that New York and LA and Chicago aren't in the top 50. I really am, considering that the sports markets that are there. Um, Yet the US does perform quite well when it comes to channel viewership. So that is a very interesting subplot to things. Australian viewership is good, but it's more spread out across all of Australia, like Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, you know, Northern Queensland with like Townsville, for example. So the viewership in Australia is more spread out across all the cities. So that's why they appear lower in the top 50 list. But there are some locations that really surprise me how high they are on the viewership list. So there's a few locations in the West Midlands that aren't called Birmingham, Wolverhampton, that appear higher than some bigger cities around the world, which surprised me. But yeah, the research I did and looking at the analytics is very interesting, very very interesting. Obviously, I've done a lot of rugby union and rugby league content, which will explain New Zealand and Ireland with viewership in those locations being what it is, and with the success of um, the Irish national side in the Six Nations in recent years, and of course rugby league and rugby union just being religions in New Zealand. I'm not surprised with that. But what does surprise me is some of the UK figures and some of the North American figures. That's what really surprises me. Is that some really obscure places have got higher viewership than some sports mad locations. So there is that. Obviously, we we we've got not long left in the regular season when it comes to a lot of leagues. And yeah, as I say, the Premier League relegation battle is very, very tight. The promotion hunt in the Championship is tight for the playoff places. So there's a lot of ups and downs occurring in the professional leagues. In the rugby league in Australia, obviously the West Tigers are the only winless team left. Done a video on them and looking at their 5-game losing streak to start the season, and there's question marks over the club yet again. Could they be facing another wooden spoon season? Is Tim Sheens and the Benji Marshall experiment the right way to go with coaching? Um, the Luke Brooks situation. So that's very, very interesting as well. Um, we've got various things happening. We've got the run in of the NHL season. We're right at the end of the NHL season before the playoffs start. So it's now the business end of the season. That's hotting up. Teams are getting hot or cold at the right or wrong times. Obviously, the NHL draft this year, who gets Conor Bedard, basically. That's going to be interesting. Who gets the first overall pick and who picks him, and how deep. And then this is a very deep NHL draft this year. What do I make of the Country Bulldogs? I like what they're doing. I like what they're doing. I think they could make the top 8 this year. I think they are missing a lot of players through injury, which is a concern, but they're winning without key players, so that's a positive outcome. I think that victory over the Melbourne Storm, I think, really is a massive shot in the arm for the team in the direction that Seraldo is taking them, and they've had a decent start to the season. They've won 3 out of 5, so I think they're doing well. I think they've recruited well. I think with key players out and they're winning, I think that's a sign of their depth. They've really turned things around over the last year and a half. I think the Trent Barrett experiment was a disaster. I think Cameron Serraldo was the guy they wanted all along. So the Trent Barrett experiment, I think, set them back a year or two. I honestly do believe that. I think they would be further ahead in their rebuild and their restructuring and how the team are doing if they hadn't gone with Trent Barrett. But they have righted the ship, and I think they're going in the right direction. But I do think we're still reasonably early in the season, but they've had a very, very good start. And there are some good young players that are now getting game time. And I think they've made the right signings in the right areas to strengthen the leadership, the spine, and the creativity. Who takes over from Bellamy at Melbourne? Oh, that's a good one. I don't think the Melbourne Storm are. I think they're very likely to recruit from within. But they're having a bit of an iffy start. They're not looking Melbourne Storm like. And there were periods last season where they didn't look great either, where they went on that, I think, a 5 game losing streak. So I do think their era of being a very dominant team is coming to an end, which is a slight concern. I think there will be a couple of down seasons. I don't know who takes over from Craig Bellamy. I think the Melbourne Storm would prefer to go internal rather than external. I think Craig Bellamy will have a part to play in selecting his successor, which will be interesting to see who they bring in. There are some very, very talented assistants out there who could become head coaches. We've seen that with some very talented assistants like Seraldo and Fitzgibbon, for example, go on and have good starts to their coaching careers. There's not a lot of available head coaches out there who I think could take the Storm and carry on that momentum that Bellamy's had for so long. I do think that maybe Bellamy's coached a season or two too long. The question mark about his coaching future has been hanging over the club for a good 3-4 years now, and I think that has distracted from what they have done on the field. Obviously, winning the grand final in 2020, beating Penrith, but in the last two seasons, they've started to slip. Yes, they've had some player turnover, and yes, they've got some injuries in key positions, which doesn't help. They've got players suspended as well, which doesn't help. They've had an iffy start to the season by their standards. I think the defeat to the Bulldogs and the manner of the defeat to the Bulldogs does highlight issues that the Storm have. They are looking vulnerable. There were some defeats last year that highlighted some deficiencies with the team as well, but they've lost a lot of key figures in leadership positions in the squad. But on the Bellamy front, I don't know. I honestly don't know who could slot in there and carry the team forward and continue taking the team forward, because he's been there so long. When he does step aside, which will be at the end of this year, it is going to be a massive change in the coaching style and how. Yes, he'll have a role at the Melbourne Storm going forward for a few more years in a consultancy role or something like that. But I do think we'll see what happens. But the next 2 to 3 seasons will be vitally important for the direction the Storm take. I honestly believe that. The Storm have built a decent core following in the AFL Heartland as one club city team, so they will survive a downturn. True. Much like the Swans in the NRL Heartland who used to have Sydney Coal AFL market. Yeah, I mean, I think the junior grades and the grassroots grades in the state of Victoria could use further development. I honestly believe there is a talent pool in the state of Victoria. More people play in Western Australia at a decent level than the state of Victoria, for that matter, which is I think a problem. And the NRL could do a little bit more with the Victorian State League in growing rugby league in the state of Victoria and in Melbourne and such, and even in Geelong, the big population area. If they really want to take the battle to the AFL, which then raises the question where the 18th team will go. Will they be brave and go back to Perth? Will they be brave and go to Adelaide, for example? So, yeah, this is where I think improving the grassroots level in the state competition in the state of Victoria is important. And then we look at, as I say, where the 18th team goes, because Adelaide and Perth are strong AFL heartlands as well now. They've got some very strong AFL presence there, and obviously the Dolphins was the safe bet for the NRL for the 17th team. Where does the 18th team end up? Where do they go? Western Australia does have a decent state competition, and players who are currently playing in the NRL have at some point played their junior rugby league in Western Australia, which is not the case with Melbourne and with the state of Victoria, which is a concern. But there isn't that pathway in place. Um, what do I think the order will be for 18, 19, 20? I think 19 and 20 is too far ahead. I think that's looking too far down the track. We've just got to get the 18th team in next. The North Sydney Bears or the Bears organisation, maybe it could be Central Coast, could be a potential 18th team. But again, that's East Coast, that's Sydney, that's New South Wales, Central Coast. Again, playing safe. Um, Perth for me would be a really good location. They've got ready-made facilities. There are players there. There are fans there. There's a grassroots league in Western Australia. Adelaide, state of origin does well, and when they take games on the road, games do well in South Australia. But it wasn't a success the first time around. Let's be brutally honest. You could have another team in New Zealand. Um, that is plausible. I think the crowd at the Wellington game for the Warriors was pretty good to start the season. Could have been better, but it was pretty decent. And the Warriors are having a really good start to the season, so that you could build upon that. So there is that potential. You could go another team in Queensland, absolutely, like Ipswich, for example, or Cairns, possibly. But that would then would the North Queensland Cowboys be happy with another team in their catchment area in their backyard? The options are endless to a certain extent. There are options on the table that you could put a third team in Brisbane, for example. Um, and so it'll be interesting to see when the NRL decides to put that 18th franchise up for tender and the bids that come in. We know that the North Sydney Bears organisation are ready to go and are ready to jump in 2025. That's been stated on the record. We know that there were two other bids in the Brisbane area before the Dolphins came in. So that they will be the safe options. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see where the NRL goes. But where they do end up going with the 18th team, they have to really invest in the state league and in the grassroots game and in the junior game as well, and grow the game with schools and universities and further education colleges. And I think that's where they've sort of failed in the state of Victoria. The fact that only 15 NRL players have come through the state of Victoria in 25 years is not a good look when you're trying to compete and grow your base against another established league. We've seen this happen in other major leagues in North America, for example, where it's taken a long time for the grassroots game to establish. So the NHL, for example, which I always use as an example because they've expanded massively into the US into non-traditional, what you basically class deep south markets, and in non-traditional markets, and it's taken a very very long time for the grassroots, so the youth level and the fans to buy in. But it's starting to pay off in the US in these locations. But it's taken a very, very long time and a lot of money has been spent. So it is vital that wherever the NRL end up going with the 18th team, if it's outside of the east coast of Queensland or New South Wales, that if they do go to Perth, if they do go to Adelaide, if they do go to the South Island of New Zealand, they make sure that they invest money and invest in the infrastructure to grow the player base and the club base in that new location. And the fact that South Australia only has 7 senior clubs in the whole state is ridiculous. Is ridiculous. 7 senior is ridiculous. The fact that Western Australia only has 12 senior clubs is ridiculous. And that is quite stunning. It shows that the AFL has one in those locations. Now, the Barassi line is much like, yes, it really is. It really is. I've only recently studied the Barassi line, but it is quite stunning how it just bisects the eastern, really most populated parts of Australia, apart from Melbourne, and the rest. It really is stunning how it just slices through, and how rugby league basically went, yeah, AFL can have that, and has made failed attempts to then reclaim the potential from AFL, and AFL being more successful in going the other way. The Barassi line is much like yeah, um, drawing a line around the Midwest and Tennessee, that corner downwards. The sport can't work it, and it can. In the US with the NHL. Um, but that is, I think, a failing of the NRL. How can you truly call yourselves a national competition when you're basically only playing in two and a bit states? Really, historically, you can't. I think the AFL have got the domestic market cornered, but it's the international market where I think the NRL wins. Yes, the AFL has attracted players, obviously, from the US and Ireland to come over and swap sports and give Aussie rules a go. And of course, I will when I do my videos on the Gaelic Athletic Association and hurling and Gaelic football, especially Gaelic football, losing players from Ireland to the AFL. I will look at that. New South Wales, Queensland, ACT, 12 million league. Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, Northern Territory, Western Australia, 12 million AFL. Yeah, you could argue that, but the AFL does have. I mean, the AFL situation with Tasmania is quite interesting as well. And there have been issues with the AFL off the field with administration and some scandals that are quite damaging for the AFL as a league. The Hawthorn Hawks racism scandal, I think, and then the culture scandal, I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. The fact that the AFL facing two class action lawsuits, I believe, in regards to concussion and player welfare. So we'll see. What happens with the AFL? The AFL has expanded into league areas, and a couple being number 2 league in areas, whereas league is scared to try to coexist in AFL states. Yeah, I can see that one. Again, this comes down to the governance of the game and the administrators and the money and the money men and the power brokers not being very risk averse. We've obviously, I think the Super League war has still caused some damage there in regards of risk taking. I think now in the NRL era, the league is very adverse to risk. But when you've got Andrew Abdo and Peter Volandes running the game now, you can see more risks being taken. I can see as long as Peter Volandes is commissioner, ARL commissioner, I can see more risks being taken to expand the game in new locations. Obviously, the rule changes that have been brought in over the last 3 years were a massive risk. I think they changed too many too quickly. I will say that as a fan of the sport. But the sport is not massively different from the sport I grew up watching. If anything, I like the style of play we currently have and the state of the game right now. They need to slow down the rule changes, allow those rule changes to bed in before tinkering anymore. I think they rushed too many rule changes too quickly, and then they were tinkering on the fly. And I don't like that. They didn't allow enough time for these rule changes to bed in, and they kept reactionarily changing them as time went on. I do like the 6 again rule, and I do like the one referee system. I think it marries up quite well with the Super League system as well. So in that regard, yes, they weren't afraid to take those risks. However, I wouldn't agree that all the rule changes that they've done have worked as effectively as they thought they would. So we'll see. If the Swans, Lions, and okay, start again. If the Swans, Lions, Suns, and Giants can survive in New South Wales and Queensland, why can't the Perth Reds and Adelaide Rams survive this is true. That's a fair question, and again, it comes down to a variety of issues, um, governance, and willing to take that initial investment hit, where you lose a little bit of money in the short term to make money in the long term. Getting sponsors on board, actually promoting the product in the right way, which encourages fans who may be AFL fans or A League fans or casuals to become hardcore rugby league fans. You've got to promote it in the right way. You have to obviously have the right sponsors and the right owners and the right investors on board who are willing to stay the course, not just be a short term investment, but be there for the long haul and the long run. Um, and you've got to recruit the right players. You've got to find players willing to relocate from Sydney or Brisbane or Townsville or even Melbourne, because there's players now established in Melbourne who are quite happy moving their families there and setting up roots there. You've got to encourage players to be willing to be brave and go to the other side of the country, move their families to the other side of the country. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, when the Swans did start, I mean, but you've also got to have a league that supports the expansion team when they are struggling. Now, this is where the Dolphins have done really, really well. They had a lot of money behind them anyway from the Leagues Club. They were quite a wealthy organisation. They had their own stadium already there. They had a youth system. So you don't really need to give the Redcliffe Dolphins, for example, a lot of support. If you are, however, going to transplant and put a team in Perth or in Adelaide, when you've got a very small player base in those regions anyway for lower grade players and very few clubs, you're going to the league has got to be brave and continue to support those start-up clubs in their infancy. Maybe for about 5, 10 years, they need to financially support them and be willing to take the financial hit in order for those clubs to establish themselves in new locations. They've also got to encourage players to go over, including young players. Yes, that is the key: is getting those young players into development systems and support them and make sure that they can settle in new locations halfway across the continent, because that's what Australia is. It's a continent. But we've had this argument before with expansion teams where they really are bad and they can't sell tickets, and it's not just an NRL thing or an AFL thing. We've had this issue before in other major leagues in the US and Canada where an expansion team just sucks and they can't give away free tickets, or a relocation team sucks and they can't sell out stadiums and arenas and such. And they just have to dish out subsidised or free tickets, and the league has to dip in and support them with financial payment. Um, it doesn't you don't always get that Vegas Golden Knights kind of expansion in the NHL where they literally made a Stanley Cup final in their first year. You don't. That is an aberration rather than a rule. You don't. Most expansion teams generally, yeah, are average at best. They're competitive but average at best. So we'll see. Dr. Jeffrey Edelsten, hang on, the Swans, the NRL should meet with staunch Western Australian mining magnate Twiggy Forrester back in Arlington, sponsored by Fortune. I don't know enough about Australian millionaires and billionaires to make comment on potential um, owners or sponsors to make comment on that. But if the NRL is keen to grow and to truly be a national competition again, they do need to get the right investment. And so, yes, if they were to go to one of the wealthiest men in Western Australia, would you mind sponsoring or being a part owner or being an investor in the NRL? Um, they need to have the right conversations to make sure that the location is financially viable. I honestly believe fans in Perth will turn up. If you were to get, um, you know, all 10,000 or so, or however many registered players it is, in you could fill a stadium with their families. You could definitely build. There is clearly a fan base for the sport in Western Australia and in Perth. A lot of people from Eastern Australia have relocated to Perth for work and because it's cheaper to live. So there is clearly that transition over there. Oh no, they're still persisting with Arizona. The situation with Arizona is the arena issue, and I honestly believe that will get passed by City Council ordinance on a vote at the end of next month. Um, the arena situation is not as bad as what happened in Atlanta. Atlanta in 2011, they didn't have a building for that next season, and they were lucky that I was an original Jets fan, and they were lucky that the city of Winnipeg had an ownership group that already had an AHL franchise in an NHL ready arena and took them. I think the NHL obviously has realised the strength of the Phoenix metropolitan area market, and the Arizona sports market as a whole. Phoenix is a massive city, in the US. The fact that currently they're playing in a collegiate arena that is a problem, and it's not ideal. But they're selling out that arena for every game. So there's now they've got over 100% capacity, if that makes sense. So there's a queue of tickets now. They're selling out an arena, plus they've got people waiting to get tickets, which is a positive sign. The ownership group, with their planned development of this entertainment district, turning over a brownfield site into a hotel, arena, shopping, and residential section of the city of Tempe. The city of Tempe will be like, we want this with the tax dollars and the income that will come in to our city in the Phoenix metropolitan area. They're still persisting. The NHL has said there's no plans to relocate the Coyotes anywhere outside of Arizona. If that means they end up moving to Tucson, they move to Tucson. But they're still in Arizona. The NHL has also gone very, very quiet on any potential further expansion. They've not ruled it out, but they're at 32 teams, and that becomes a bit mental for fixturing, quality of depth, drafting, the whole shebang. But what is interesting is when a team is stopped struggling in a non-traditional location, the calls to move the team disappear. But the Buffalo Sabres have been crap for a lot longer than Arizona have, and no one's saying move the Buffalo Sabres out of Buffalo, which is a traditional market. No one's saying move the team. Those calls don't exist. But for the best part of over a decade now, the Buffalo Sabres, much like the West Tigers in the NRL, have been crap. Right? But no one's saying we need to relocate the Buffalo Sabres, or even the Buffalo Bills for that matter, from the city of Buffalo. No one's saying that. The team have been dreadful for over a decade. And it looks like they're going to miss the playoffs yet again, which will extend their record of not making the playoffs in the Major League. That is quite stunning. But when Carolina were having their struggles, the calls were move the team. New owner comes in, team suddenly turns things around, wins a lot, makes deep runs into the playoffs. No one's saying move the team. Tampa, they talking about giving away cut price or free tickets. They were giving away a third of their tickets were free to school kids to fill the arena in the early days because the team weren't selling out. Right? They weren't selling all their tickets. They were giving it. I think they still give away subsidised tickets to high school kids. They've won 3 Stanley Cups and appeared in 3 straight Stanley Cup finals in their history. Right? They won 3 Stanley Cups in their history and appeared in multiple Stanley Cup finals. No one's saying move the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Florida Panthers, they got a good deal on their arena, and their arena deal that they've signed with the owners of BB&T Center in Sunrise, which is on the outskirts of Miami. They've got a very, very good arena deal. Very, very good arena deal. They don't sell out, but they've got a good arena deal. And they were President's Trophy winners last year. So suddenly they're making the playoffs again, and people say, well, move Florida. Well, they're not going anywhere. The Cronulla Sharks with their stadium rebuild, I mean, they're playing well as well, and they've got the right culture at the team. They're playing well. They've got the best player in the game in Nico Hines. Yeah, you're gonna sell tickets with some of the players they have and the way they play. No one says move the Sabres or West Tigers. Well, actually, the West Tigers. There's a few calls to split that team up and get rid of them. The only traditional team co-op and relocation rumors is North Melbourne. Yeah, moving them to Tasmania, I believe, is the debate. But North Melbourne are run really badly, and there's always some kind of scandal going on with North Melbourne and basically also being very, very bad. School kids getting free tickets sounds like the Pakistan Test cricket team in the New Zealand series. Yeah, I mean, this is what's really interesting. Where I live in the UK, my local ice hockey team in their old arena used to do school nights where they would go around local schools and give out discounted family tickets and also dish out free tickets to a school in the local district. And it actually benefited the team in the long run because then the families would keep coming back with their kids and their kids' friends, and it actually increased ticket sales. It increased merchandise sales. So this schools program that the local ice hockey team had, I believe they still continue with it at their new arena, which is in a different town. But they brought in this schools club package where they would give out free tickets to schools, and they would see what the uptake would be with parents and staff, and they did school trips and things like that. Actually, in the long run, over the years that this program has been going, attendances actually went up, and ticket sales in the long run went up. Merchandise sales went up. Interest in the sport went up. Social media, more people signed up to the social media account. More people watched on the online streaming service that the league has. It actually benefited not only the local community. More kids signed up to play junior hockey. It had a positive impact over a good 5-10 year period. They've been doing this program, right? It had a massive positive impact. Admittedly, the old arena got knocked down. They moved to a new, slightly smaller arena, but the school's plan is still in place, and they've now widened their reach because the team has moved from one town to another town, but they've widened their reach with their schools and education program to a much bigger catchment area, which means you can actually encourage even more fans to come in and more kids to then play junior hockey, and then more fans to come in, more families to come in to watch it for the first time. Oh, actually, I like this sport. And then suddenly you get the adult beer league, the rec league. Dad decides to put on a pair of ice skates for the first time in 20 years and learn how to play the game. And it had a positive impact on the local community. It also had a positive impact on the team's attendance, paid attendance, because in the long term, they couldn't sell enough tickets. They were selling out games, even when the team sucked. So if you have that good community outreach, you can actually positively benefit the organisation in the long run. But if you're constantly doing it just to fill out the arena and you're not having that positive attendance growth with real actual paid attendance, then there's clearly a problem with the organisation. Will Test cricket die or regress to T20 in my opinion? I think cricket as a whole is badly governed by the ICC. The BCCI, ECB, and Cricket Australia have far too much power at the international level when it comes to governing the international game. I think the 100 format, I physically hate it. It's not cricket. They've had to write new rules for the 100 format. I like the three current forms of international cricket that we have. I do like T20, I do like one day, and I do like Test cricket. I think a lot of the problem is the TV rights and accessibility. Now, I don't know what it's like in Australia or New Zealand for the TV rights, for example. I can't comment on on the TV rights and the accessibility of viewership, for example, down under. What I can say is over here in England, the UK, I think they've got the TV rights wrong. Putting it behind a paywall for the best part of 20 years 18 years now, since we won the Ashes 2005 was a blunder. The ECB saw dollar symbols and pound symbols and money and chased that. So they made a massive blunder. So yeah, British cricket fans have been denied the ability to access the sport as easy as they used to. I think when you've got a domestic test series, so you're obviously in Australia, I'm in England, I think your domestic test series should be on free to wear. I also think T20 and one day in T20 is made for TV, right? T20 is just made for families, really, because it's a quicker format of the game. The kids don't lose that much interest. But the way they've marketed the competitions, I don't think has worked. I don't think has worked as well. As I say, I can't comment on the structure of the TV rights for the Australian domestic market. I can't comment on that. Obviously, certain bits are on free to wear, certain bits aren't. It is a national institution in Australia. Obviously, the baggy green cap is a national institution. The sport is much beloved and has a higher percentage of population watching than here in England these days. What is noticeable is peak viewership of cricket has declined in England, at least, or in the UK. The World Cup final in 2019, the viewership peak was still less than the viewership peak in the Ashes the decade prior, and it was a very noticeable drop in the 14 years between that Ashes win and that World Cup win, of about 10 to 11 million at peak. That's 10 to 11 million fans that have tuned out of the sport. That means less interest, less tickets being sold for games, less merchandise being sold, a whole variety of knock-on impacts that impact the value of TV rights. The IPL is no longer on free-to-air TV here in the UK. That's a massive blunder. Fantastic competition without a shadow of a doubt. I loved the IPL watching it free-to-air on one of our domestic carriers over here in the UK. That was a really poor commercial decision. Having the domestic county game barely getting covered at all. Just certain decisions taken by the ECB in regards to TV rights have been an absolute shambles. And I would say the same would also. I don't know what the criticism is of Cricket Australia and their commercial agreements, but I would argue that we've done the Ashes, we flogged the Ashes to death. It's lost its appeal for me. We play it every 2 years now. It's completely lost its appeal to me. It should be every 5 years. Come on, or every 4 years. It shouldn't be as regular. They've milked that cash cow to death. Partly because Cricket Australia and the ECB are the big three when it comes to the ICC. So there you go. For blokes growing up in Australia, when you get to 15, you start watching Test more than T20 usually it's too many big on kids just cricket. But yeah, I think I've always look. I love the sport. I'm the only member of my family to like cricket. So when people say, "Oh, you've got to have a parent or a relative who's a fan of cricket for you to like the sport," that's bullshit. Whoever comes up with that study is a twat. Has no knowledge of what it is to be a sports fan and find a sport interesting. I've loved cricket since the age of 3. I played it. My dad wasn't a massive cricket fan. It didn't matter because it was accessible on free-to-air coverage at the time until 2005. Um, it And when I was a kid, I was very ill at various points. I had several health issues when I was a kid, so I couldn't go to school all the time. I would have lengthy spells stuck at home in quarantine, basically. A 5-day test match when you're not well and you can't do much is a great way to just tune out and relax. So when I was growing up in my early teenage years, I had a few health issues. I would happily watch a 5-day test match. Most of my mates weren't interested. And we played cricket at our school. Most of my mates were like, more interested in the football, the rugby league, whatever. I would happily watch a 5-day test match. I still do. If I can get the chance and go around a friend's house and they've got a test match, I'll happily watch a 5-day test. Quite easily watch a 5-day test match. The issue is our viewership habits are now changing. Our generation is changing our viewership habits massively. Massively. I'm assuming you're a similar age to me. I'm assuming you're in your 20s or your 30s. I could be wrong. But our viewership habits are changing. The younger generation are turning their back on subscription TV model, and they're going to the subscription streaming service, which is actually cheaper. So that's something I found. I've done it myself. I've turned away from traditional TV to watching on the laptop, which is what I'm using now. It's the broadcasting rights need to follow suit. So this is where Viaplay. You may not have heard of Viaplay, but Viaplay is a Swedish company that bought out a British broadcaster in Premier Sports. So Premier Sports and Free Sports was one of the smaller free-to-air and subscription broadcast groups. Free Sports was their free-to-air channel. Premier Sports 1 and 2 with their subscription channels. Viaplay have come in and bought out a British TV company, basically. And what they've done, and I will stress this, is they've got 2 packages. You can still have your TV package. You can also get a streaming service for cheaper than the TV package on Viaplay. Right? So that is an interesting thing, is this company has realised our habits are changing. We're turning away from the mainstream TV and we're heading towards a more online streaming presence or rewind TV or smart TV. So they've tailored their package to that. Now, we always hear about TV rights negotiations and broadcast right negotiations and how much their value is going to be worth and how it will impact things like salary caps and club finances and a whole range of things. And what we've seen in the US, for example, is the collapse of several regional sports networks, which are going to have a knock-on impact when it comes to the next round of TV rights negotiations and broadcast right negotiations. So the 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 media landscape is changing, and I've seen that in the last few years, let alone the last decade. Social media has changed things. The younger generation, people my age, are not paying for Sky Sports, or in your case, Fox Sports, or BT Sport, or I don't know what the other satellite pay per view broadcasters are in Australia, but they're not paying for it in the numbers that our parents were. So my mum and my stepdad, they have Sky Sports, they've got BT Sport, they've got Viaplay, they have all the sports broadcasters, they have that. I don't. Uh, Firstly, I can't justify the spend, and secondly, I don't want to watch all the sports that are broadcast. There's only a handful of sports that I'm really passionate about. So why would I want to pay for a package that covers sports that I'm not interested in? Like, I know the channel name is the Sports Buffing, but you will notice I cover more content than I like. I've heard of Optus, I've heard of Fox, I haven't heard of Stan. There's is it Roku? Is the other one? That's a streaming service that's linked with Fox. Um, look, every country has its own broadcast rules and regulations, and how many subscription services are allowed, how much has to be on free to air, and there's that kind of debate about free to air actually works better. KO, that's the one. I knew there was one. Roku's obviously in America. Ugh, what am I doing? KO. It's Hulu. That's the American one. That's the one. So there are these packages out there, and to various levels of financial growth and success, and we have them over here as well. But what we're seeing is a change in our viewership habits and how we consume. I mean, a lot of sports are now using YouTube and other streaming packages, like where we work with a streaming website. You can watch the game or every game for X amount per game. These are more minority sports, and they are turning away from the mainstream um, broadcasters. And the broadcasters keep putting up their prices. And there's been a backlash, especially during the COVID pandemic. There was a massive, massive backlash when the broadcasters said, "We want a rebate. We want to renegotiate our TV deals with," because we didn't know how long we were going to be shut down for. We didn't know how long this was going to last. We didn't know if it would be a very short lockdown or be indefinite. There was no idea. And the excuse that the broadcasters came up with was games with no fans in attendance. That's not what we signed up for. We want a rebate. And that then led to a lot of people going, "Well, I'm going to cancel my subscription. Bye bye." And that was a thing. And we've seen the great cancellation, as I call it. A lot of people turning their backs on the traditional subscription broadcast model and the pay per view model. More people will decide to illegally stream boxing pay per view than pay on top of their subscription. So there is that change in the viewership dynamic. I think COVID has accelerated that change in the viewership dynamic. Yes, the British Basketball League's on YouTube. The World Endurance Racing Championship is on YouTube. I think, the Australian Ice Hockey League's on YouTube. There's several sports on YouTube. This COVID renegotiations, while the NRL makes 200 million less than the AFL each year, despite being the NRL being the clear biggest in team. Yeah, I mean, look, this is where I think they need that 18th team in. So then you get an extra game for each round of fixtures. You won't have a bye round for each team per season, or two bye rounds for each team, because an odd team league does not work. The fact that they very quickly renegotiated a TV deal and did financially save the game. I mean, I don't know how truthfully the game was financially buggered at the time. Is amazing. Fan numbers and attendance figures are really, really good as well. Like, fans actually in attendance is I think above pre-pandemic levels. I think there's been a resurge in people going, "Thankfully, we're allowed back out again, and we can get involved." And of course, the NRL proved, as well as the AFL, that they can reschedule games very, very quickly, and not a single game was lost to COVID. Once play resumed, not a single game was fully cancelled for COVID. They just quickly rearranged it and moved locations. So they've proven they can do that infrastructure on the fly. which is good. But no, the COVID renegotiation, yeah, I mean, look, the TV companies, this is where when you're heavily reliant on TV money as a league and as a sport, this is where you can have problems. Look at rugby league, for example, in the UK and France. The TV deal I think is worth 35. Well, worth $35 million pounds a year, which at the time was worth about 50 million Australian dollars a year. The Super League TV deal was crap. And then Channel 4 come in and say we'll buy a proportion of the game and add our free to air coverage to it. Channel 4 is a loss making broadcaster. So the TV deal that the Super League has is not great at all. British ice hockey's faced this in the past, where the old Super League, Sky Sports and BBC had the rights, and then Sky Sports decided to turn the taps off, which is Murdoch at the time, and it's taken the best part of 20 years for the sport to really start recovering. I would, to a certain extent, yes, but Channel 4 itself is a part public, part privately funded broadcaster. Its model is a bit different to your standard free to air commercial and the BBC. It's a hybrid of both, because I, as a license fee payer, some of my license fee goes towards Channel 4, and also the advertising revenue also goes towards Channel 4. Channel 4 has been losing money for a very, very long time, and it's also struggled to hold on to sports rights for a very, very long time. Back when I was a kid, it had horse racing, it had the Italian football on there, and they were its crown jewels, right? And it lost both. It had the F1 for a brief period, lost that. It had the Irish test matches for a brief period, lost them for the rugby union in the Six Nations and the Autumn International. So it had the NFL London Series games for a brief period, lost them. So it hasn't been able to retain sports rights. It's lost big sports rights many, many times. Channel 5 is completely independent. Yes, so is ITV. ITV is on the stock exchange. I believe Channel 5 is on the stock exchange as well in the UK. And Channel 5 and ITV have had some ups and downs with their broadcast rights with sport, but they do have them. And they pick them up occasionally. But with the advertising downturn we've seen and the financial constraints put upon the economy since 2007, 2008, so for the best part of half my life, basically, truly. So since the 2007, 2008 beginnings of the financial crisis till now, broadcasters have had ups and downs. We've seen broadcasters go out of business around the world, not just here in the UK, just around the world. And we're seeing it now in North America with Bally Sports and its parent companies filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We've seen, Warner Brothers Discovery, which own AT&T, Sportsnet, Comcast, pulling out of the sports market in the US. We are seeing some broadcasters really struggling. We've seen broadcasters merge together. We've seen massive staff layoffs, and then we have this change in viewership habits that I think long term I can see traditional broadcasting go fully online. And the network, the ITV and Channel 5 networks are in a healthier position than the Channel 4 network and its related channels, a much healthier position. But ITV nearly went bust back in the day, 20 odd years ago, it nearly went out of business. So this is not a, a stable market. Let's be honest. Multiple broadcasters have ceased broadcasting. They've gone right where we're now going to a fully online model, or we're ceasing broadcasting altogether. And they're normally smaller niche channels like the Bravo network, which was part owned, I believe, by, was it Virgin or NTL? Doesn't exist anymore. Which was kind of a fun network actually back in the day when I was a teenager. It was hilarious to watch Bravo late at night. Some of the chronic stuff on there doesn't exist anymore. Viacom, which owns MTV, has been losing money for donkey's years. Um, so some broadcasters are really financially struggling and have been for quite some time. Other broadcasters do better, but have found things tough in recent. I mean, BT Sport here in the UK has been losing money for since the foundation. Sounds like Channel 10 here in Australia own the Channel 10. Um, yeah, Channel 10. I don't know. Is Channel 10 still going? I believe it is, but Channel 10 was buggered, and that sort of started to lead to the Super League wars. So when a network has primary rights, and then starts struggling, or a network has the sole or primary rights to a league and then decides not to renew them, and you can't get a decent broadcast partner to come in to fill the gap, it could have massive financial consequences, catastrophic almost. Um, but it's nice hearing from a different country's point of view, because what I found over doing this channel for many years is I will normally only, when I do live streams, normally hear from that British point of view, or Anglo-Irish point of view, should I say, so UK and Ireland. I don't really get to hear about the point of view from Australia, New Zealand, the US, Canada, South Africa, the other English dominions, basically, the old English British Commonwealth. You don't get to hear that overseas point of view going, oh, this has happened, or that's happened, or this is how it's structured over here. Or occasionally, I get a bit of European feedback, but it is what it is. Channel 10 has been on its deathbed for 30 years. CBS bought it 5 years. The fact that this channel is lingering on with all its structural problems and financial issues is a testament to those hardworking people at the network. You've got to feel sorry for those people at the network if it's really that bad. Um, but it does tell you about the state of Australian broadcasting. Um, And you've got to remember, in Australia, that you've got a population that's like a third of the size of here in the UK, a third of the size. So there's less money to go around. There's less corporate money to go around. Um, so the fact that the AFL and the NRL are as wealthy as they are, and are worth as much as they are, not only internally but also globally, tells you all you need to know about the success of those two leagues. 10 owns the rights to the soccer. Oh, the A League and all that. That's going to be interesting. How Channel 10, that network struggles, impacts the A League's ability to grow as a league. Not only grow internally in Australia, but then also the strength of the league to go, well, we're going to sell our rights overseas as well. If I wouldn't say it's a terrible, horrible excuse. It is classed as a minority sport in Australia, but you've got to start somewhere. Not everyone's going to buy into every sport. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like watching a bit of AFL every now and then. I prefer the NRL. It, it is what it is. I mean, I like, obviously, my rugby union, but I prefer my rugby league. I like my ice hockey. I like my motorsport, but I don't like F1. But I like other forms of not you know. I mean, the A League is like a poor man's MLS. It's trying to compete in a very established, traditional, entrenched sports market in Australia. Um, oh, the ethnic violence in Australian soccer. I know about that. There's some Australian subscribers who are a bit older than me who talk about the Croatian, Serbian violence and Greek violence in Melbourne. Yes, we did see that incident with the goalkeeper being attacked by some fans in Melbourne. That made global news. That isn't. So when we talk about the football violence in Europe, especially the UK, and how we have a bad reputation, it's not just an English disease, as they used to call it, or a British disease. It is, the sport has a disease. Um, I wouldn't say that the A League is a terrible, horrible league, but what the A League, much like the MLS in the US, is having to face is fighting the entrenched tribal kind of nature of the sports market. And the MLS has done it via a route of ruthless expansion. Um, is that sustainable long term? Probably not. But because of its ruthless expansion, what's happened in North America is what you call soccer, what I would call football. It's the fastest growing sport in the United States. It's now overtaken ice hockey and is about to overtake baseball in the US for participation. That's not professionalism. That's participation at grassroots, at high school, at college. When you've got a sport that's now overtaking two very established sports that have had professional leagues and professionalism for over 100 years, and the MLS is less than 30 years old, um, that tells you what you need to know about how they got their not only their national rights for the MLS, but then they've got the overseas rights for the Premier League, the Bundesliga, La Liga, the French League, the Italian Serie A, the other European leagues, the Champions League, the Europa League, the Europa Conference League. And what I think it's NBC and CBS. I believe it's NBC as the Premier League right. What they've done well is they've negotiated some really good TV rights with the big European leagues. And then, of course, you've got that Hispanic community. So they've got the Mexican League, then they've got the South American leagues. What the broadcasters in the US have realized is the MLS is growing, but because you've got people from all around the world live in the US and have an interest, they've got some really good TV deals where they've imported the sport. Right. The Maple Leafs could sell out a 70,000 stadium revenue if they hold. Uh, yeah. Look, the team, look, regular season, the team is fantastic. Playoffs, the team isn't. The thing is, even when the team was dreadful in the 80s and the 70s, they would sell out Maple Leaf Gardens. So this is where the Toronto market will support their teams. Fair enough. But just go across the border to Buffalo, another fanatical fan base that has put up with a decade of not even making the playoffs. Fans are finally starting to stay away, and the average attendance has plummeted. The fact that the Maple Leafs fans keep turning up year after year, supporting a team that has underperformed for the best part of 55 years stuns me. But hey, they keep turning up. They can't sell enough tickets. They've got a queue to get tickets. It's expensive to go to a Maple Leafs game. Costs a lot. So the fact that they're still it's mad. But yeah, there's several NHL teams that could quite easily sell out. Soldier Field, for example. Much needed win for Catalan Dragons against the Castle Tigers around 7 over the weekend. Yeah, the Catalan Dragons. I think it's very interesting how it's all playing out in the Super League because they've got that extra couple of weeks over the NRL as well, and of course St Helens winning the World Club Challenge. Is that a one-off? Is the Super League finally closing the gap in quality on the NRL? That's another question. Soccer is number one for participation in Australia too. It has been for decades. Doesn't necessarily translate to professional money. Yeah, it's the organisation of the sport at professional level. This is the problem. The MLS struggled for the first decade of its existence. Really struggled. Then David Beckham comes along, and the trajectory changed, and the course of the league changed. And they tried professional setups before and failed. It does come down to administration. It does come down to getting the right people to market the sport, and also the pathways as well for young players coming through. The pathways have to be looked at, in my opinion. All right, let's have a look. The sport will explode after 2026. What in the US? Well, it's possible, but the MLS has been growing rapidly for the best part of 15 years, and participation levels are from kids right through to adults at grassroots. Amateur clubs and having that kind of local, barely kind of Sunday league kind of. It's grown massively. It's rapidly growing. So I think it's already grown at a decent rate for quite some time. And it's to do with the TV rights of the overseas leagues, which has also helped. But also look at some of the attendance figures of MLS games. You'll be surprised the attendance figures they are selling out stadiums. Atlanta sells out 70,000 a game. So yeah, people turn up. No, the MLS will never have promotion relegation because it's a franchise system. You're already spending hundreds of millions of dollars to have a team, or tens of millions. I don't know how much the expansion fees are. You're spending a lot of money to get a team to then drop down a level. No, it's a franchise system, or it's not a promotion relegation system. It has been mentioned as an idea, but uh, will it work? Will the owners be willing to agree to such a thing, considering the amount of money they've put on the table? We'll have to see. Random question: my thoughts on the new World Supercross Championship versus the AMA. I prefer the AMA Championship. I just prefer it. I haven't seen a race in a few years, but I've always been a fan of motocross, and I like the AMA Motocross Championship because it's the best championship in the world, in my opinion. I understand like they've got the World Motocross and Supercross Championships, but the AMA Championship, for my mind, is the best motocross championship there is on the 250s and the 450s, and back in the day the 125s as well. Um, you would never see a Ricky Carmichael lapping the entire field in Minnesota ever again in 2006. That was ridiculous that day. The amount of rain they had, the track just turned to. He lapped Bubba Stewart like 4 times. So, Ricky Carmichael, you're not going to see that ever happen again. But that was possibly the greatest day of motocross. Like, what's he doing? He's lapped everyone. He's lapping them again. And Bubba Stewart finished second, 4 laps down. That won't happen again. The greatest NHL game in history, in my opinion, what I've seen or of all time, because there's been some pretty good ones. Oh, that's a really tough one. That is a real tough one. Um, oh, that is actually a bit of a stumping for me. I think as a Jets fan, seeing the first playoff game back in Winnipeg on the TV in 2015, that that was a moment that sends chills up the back of my spine. The Winnipeg whiteout. Um, Game 7 against Nashville in 2018 was another one to make the conference final. Is another one. So there's a few. I don't know. NHL game. I can tell you. Because you'd have to base it. Is it a playoff game? Is it regular season? I think the Columbus Blue Jackets beating Montreal 10-0 a few years back um, was quite a result, and they had Montoya in goal, and he was just facing a firing squad, and the coach left him in there. He wouldn't put Carey Price on, just left Montoya to be slaughtered. And I believe that was that the first or second season of Tortorella in Columbus. That was a result. The trivia fact: the term "goat" was first used for Ricky Carmichael in motocross. It's now used in sport world. Yeah, I don't like the term "goat." I really don't. Um, don't get me wrong. Ricky Carmichael is a legend of just motorsport, not just motocross, but motorsport. I don't like the term "goat" at all. It's not my term that I would use. But uh, um, he is the greatest motocross racer in North American history. I wouldn't say of all time. You got to look at some of the Belgian riders in Europe. But no, it's overused. Ronaldo's not a goat. Messi's not a goat. Pele's the goat. There you go. That mic drop. Just going to put another popular opinion out there. Pele's the better. Yeah, Pele in his prime, far superior than ego Ronaldo and Messi tax dodger. And the fact Ronaldo Nazario, I think had a better goals per game average and had a shorter career than those two. So there you go. That's my opinion on that one. The best Stanley Cup victory, Ray Bork in 2001 with the Colorado Avalanche. Ray Bork's Ray Bork's Stanley Cup. Yeah, Ray Bork's Stanley Cup. Because that was his last ever game. That would be, I think possibly the best Stanley Cup victory. There you go. Pele was Pele never lost a World Cup final. There you go. Play 3-1-3. Also the youngest player to score at World Cup as well. Yeah, thank you for popping by. I'm just interested to know what part of Australia you're viewing from, um, because I like to understand, like, where my viewers are from. Obviously, Dublin and Auckland are the two most popular cities of all time on the channel for viewership. So it's very interesting to know where people. Oh, near Sydney. So Greater Western Sydney. You've got the Central Coast. You've got down to Wollongong and all that. Sydney's a big area, so near Sydney doesn't really narrow it down. It could be half of New South Wales, uh, especially the south half of New South Wales. But near Sydney is good enough. You mentioned the West Midlands. I'm either from Kidderminster and Redditch. Yeah, the West Midlands, Kidderminster and Redditch came up quite highly. I know Dudley. I know Dudley. I've been to Dudley. I've got family from Dudley. I've been to Dudley many times. It's got a nice castle and a nice zoo. The high street's a bit shit. Dudley, I've been to Dudley a lot. As I say, nice high street, nice castle. Oh no, nice zoo, nice castle, shit high street. It's Dudley, but it's not Walsall. So that, I know Dudley very, very well. I've got family. I've worked up near Dudley. I know Dudley very well. But no, Kidderminster and Redditch came up quite highly for consistent viewership. But Dudley was in there as well. Dudley gets a fair few. I'm assuming that's you, Mr. Huss. But very surprised that Birmingham as a city wasn't higher. Very surprised that Liverpool and Manchester weren't in the top 50. London was third. Newcastle, considering all the videos I've done on Newcastle United, really surprised that Newcastle wasn't higher on the list as well. But a lot of people decide to hide their location via VPN and decide to either not make public their location on YouTube, for example, which is fair, which is totally understandable. But those that do, it's very striking where people are viewing from. No Wales, although Cardiff and Swansea do get in there, and Wrexham, but not in the numbers that I expected, quite frankly. And when I look at the four countries of the UK, Scotland doesn't do very well at all. Lately, Scotland's been the weakest performing of the nations in the UK for a significant period of time. Because when you go on the YouTube studio, which is what I will be doing after I've done this live stream, it tells you so certain countries like Germany and Australia. Oh no, Australia have changed it now, but Germany, Canada, the US, and the UK, because they've got like that. The UK's got the four home nations. Germany's a federation of states. Canada's got provinces and territories, and the US has obviously got 50 states. You can look at where certain provinces and regions, how they're doing, on top of the cities as well. And what is very, very interesting is how this channel in the US, at least, a lot of people in California watch. A lot of people in California have watched historically, and Nevada. Not so much on the East Coast, which is very surprising with the time difference. So if I'm posting a video now, the East Coast are just waking up. For example, if I was to do like 12 o'clock, it'd be like 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's like about 6:30 now, quarter to 7. So people on the East Coast are starting to wake up. So if this was like a Saturday or Sunday, it is a thing. West Coast, we're 8 hours ahead, so I'm really surprised that the West Coast viewership is as high as it is in the US. I'm also surprised with a fair few of the results. I really am. But Scotland, I've done a lot of club history videos in Scotland. I've covered the SPL quite religiously back in the day. I've covered obviously the Six Nations with the rugby union quite a lot, and especially with the Scotland team as well. Scotland just doesn't have that same drive that it did. It's just lately. Overall, Scotland has a much higher viewership than Wales and Northern Ireland. Partly to do with population as well. There's more people that live in Scotland. There's more people in big cities in Scotland, like Edinburgh and Aberdeen and Glasgow. Do I need to do more Scotland videos? At the moment, I might decide to do a few more club history videos. Yes. What content? No viewership. Antarctica. Ironically, I've got viewers and subscribers from Brazil, Asia, I've got viewers in Japan and Vietnam and Thailand who are mostly expats, and Singapore. There's a lot of Australian and British expats that live in Dubai, for example. I get a lot of viewers from Dubai, and they're mostly North American or European expats who are over there for business. And a lot of people who live out in Dubai and who have business interests. So, no, Asia and South America, I do get viewers. I do get viewers. Recently on my Port Vale video, which I did last year, guy left a comment going, "I've subscribed. I'm from Brazil. I came across Port Vale whilst playing FIFA, and then you did a video." I was like, "What?" So I have got viewers in South America. I've got viewers in some of the South American locations. Um, and people forget. People think, "Oh, South America is full of poverty. You know, they don't do foreign languages." A lot of people learn English in Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay. Uruguay is a very well educated country. So yes, there I do get viewers in South America. I do get viewers in Asia. Um, there's a lot of expats live in Singapore and Dubai, for example. I get a lot of views from Vietnam, and it's actually from an Australian who's gone over there for work. He's probably just typed in Port Vale and came across your video. Crazy how the algorithm works. Um, yeah, the algorithm. I have my views on the algorithm because obviously when Ireland beat Scotland, the viewership blew up, and that was the fastest growing video at the time in the channel's history. And then I followed it up with a couple of videos, and then it just died away again. So I had my issues with how the algorithm is promoting my content, and I could do a video like slagging off YouTube's algorithm or whatever, but won't get me very far. But the rest of my Six Nations videos didn't really hit those peaks. So for some reason, you know, obviously that result was trending on social media, and me putting in that result and that title when the Ireland result came in. Obviously, was part of that social media algorithm trend that was going on anyway. Um, but yeah, this is why the history videos don't do as well, because unless it's a big club, it won't get the traction. So if I was to do a Leicester City or Chelsea history video right now, with both managers having just been sacked, then yeah, they would definitely have more traction than when I did them last year. If I was to do the history on Bayern Munich, for example, today, and obviously beating Dortmund at the weekend, you'll get some traction there. But no, it's interesting. Like I just do the history videos because I like doing them. The fact that some of them are getting regular views, even though I did them over a year ago, are fantastic. There are some of the history videos keep getting views and others don't, and I don't understand it because it's not as if I've worded the titles any differently. Yeah, well, um, my rugby videos, not all of them, not all of them. The Ireland Scotland result is the highest viewed rugby video, but it's not the highest viewed video on the channel. What is interesting is rugby league videos do better historically, and it's a mix. It is a mix. It varies. It really does. Certain videos have done really well, and certain ones haven't, and I don't understand it. Like more people are interested in Brendan Rodgers getting sacked than Graham Potter. I just do not understand it. Certain clubs do better than others. Would I ever make? What more videos? I've done NFL, I've done NBA, I've done Major League Baseball. I've done a fair few Major League Baseball videos over the years. Um, I could do some more videos in regards to the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball. But here's the thing: it's leagues that I don't watch anymore. The NFL is like don't get me wrong. Um, like I have done NFL content. I've done a lot of NFL content historically. I've done a lot of Major League Baseball content historically. NBA not so much, although I will do some more NBA history based content. And hopefully, I'll go back in time and look at such and such incident like the NBA betting scandal with Donaghy, the referee. I could look at lockouts and player strikes, which the NBA has actually had a fair few of. I could look at the NFL and some of their historical moments like lockouts and player strikes. I've done it with Major League Baseball. I've had a fair few viewers on of the Major League Baseball content, but because I don't have that engaged passion that I do for like the NRL or the NHL or rugby union, rugby league, and such, it's harder for me to get really passionate about it. Really. And I've tuned out of the NFL over the years. And Major League Baseball to me, baseball just I'd much rather sniff glue and watch paint dry than watch baseball. Well, the Giants and the Yankees. I mean, look, we can look back at like the history of certain teams and their cultural impact. Um, absolutely, we can look at cultural impact of a team or the importance of a team on a league's direction, and so look at LA Galaxy, for example, with the MLS and their importance in helping drive the MLS forward with the David Beckham signing. Um, and without that, obviously, things are much different for the MLS. And obviously, I've done MLS content, but no, I can definitely look at Major League Baseball and do some more content in regards to Major League Baseball. But yeah, I have done NFL videos, I have done NBA, I have done Major League Baseball, but I think I could look at the NBA a little bit more with some more history videos and how the NBA overtook the NHL to become as big a league as it has. There was a period where it wasn't doing very well, and the NHL was a far superior league in North America, and then the NBA made a great job of marketing itself. And then you got the Michael Air Jordan moment where he had these Air Jordans and Nike made his Air Jordans, and every time he wore them, his team got fined, and they just paid the fine. And that film's coming out about the story behind how they came up with the Nike Air Jordans, which obviously become the Air Maxes that um, I wear today. And there is that. But I think for me, I don't feel a connection with. I've never felt a connection with baseball ever. Which video? Because I've done a couple of videos on Tom Brady. He retires again. I mentioned it in live stream. Tom Brady. I mean, he's one of those divisive characters, really, isn't it? I mean, I have done a video. I did a video when he first retired, and then he came out of retirement. And then I did a video on Gronkowski retiring and then coming out of retirement. Um, I have done videos with the NFL looking at the London series and the potential of a London team historically and why it hasn't happened. Um, and I could do a video where like, will London ever host an NFL? Will the NFL ever host a Super Bowl in London? I mean, that's a question that's been asked before. But no, I have done a video on. I have done. I believe. I remember doing a video on Gronkowski, and I remember doing a video on Brady the first time he retired. Um, but when you have like a generational talent that plays for so long, that is a dominating player in his sport, in his position. When that era, it's all about when a player retires. Do they retire at the right time? Do they carry on too long? And can they stay retired? And some players do come out of retirement to various levels of failure or success. Um, and we can look back at certain incidents in the NFL with scandal, and I can do a fair few videos on the NFL. Quarterbacks can play for longer because they get hit way less than other positions. They're protected by the players in front. No, there's rules put in place to protect the quarterback as well. When I was a kid growing up, watching the NFL, the quarterbacks were destroyed before Brady was even drafted. Brady doesn't play as long if he's drafted 10 years earlier. He's done. I did state that if Brady was 10 or 20 years older and was drafted in the 80s or the 90s, his career isn't as long. It's nowhere near as long. Um, the rules have changed with protection of the quarterback and protection of the kicker as well, and receiver protection, like kick receiver protection. Um, they have brought in rules to protect certain players from contact or excessive contact or late contact. Um, Still doesn't mean that players don't get drilled. Quarterbacks don't get they do. But the way the game has evolved, and now with the fact that the NFL has had this class action lawsuit in regards to CTE and concussions, um, a lot of sports leagues and a lot of major now, especially the team sports, being very reactionary in some of their rule changes. Look at what rugby union's been very reactionary in its rule changes in regards to the potential of world rugby and the various unions facing massive class action lawsuits. Um, the NHL, the NFL, and the CFL, again, although the CFL is a little different in its style of play and the rules, and I think a little bit less brutal than the NFL when it comes to the contact. It's still brutal sport. But the AFL now facing a class action lawsuit, the NRL bringing in this mandatory stand down policy for concussion of 11 days minimum. Um, I think some leagues are thinking about self preservation, and other leagues are also trying to bring player welfare forward and make sure. I think rugby league's more brutal than rugby union, and the NRL I think are quite right with changing their concussion protocol policy from an advisory 11 days to a compulsory 11 days minimum. I still think that minimum stand down time will be extended. I think the NRL, there's a little bit of self preservation, but at the same time, they're looking at the AFL facing these class action lawsuits. I think with the precedent that's now been set with the NFL and to a certain extent the NHL and rule changes that have been brought in, um, you're not going to take concussion out of the game. You're not going to take contact injuries out of rugby league or AFL or whatever sport. What you can do though is when a player is injured, is make sure that they are properly healed up and properly looked after while they're stood down because of injury and they don't come back and then get hurt again. Um, in the sense of they're not fully fit and they're more likely to have another injury. What we have seen is some players their careers have ended early because of concussion or because of repeat injuries to the same area because it hasn't properly healed. They haven't got the right surgery and they haven't been looked after. So it's more than just a concussion issue, in my opinion. Yes, we hear these warrior tales of a player playing on with a broken shoulder or broken ribs or a torn meniscus or whatever the injury may be, and playing through the pain, and that's fantastic. That's brilliant. That's the stuff of legend. But at the same time, you've got to think of their post-playing lives and their lives after they retire from sport. Some of them do go into business. Some of them do go into coaching or ambassadorial roles within the sport. But not every ex-player of a professional sport can adjust to retirement very well. And those that don't go back into the workplace struggle to adjust. And even those that do go back into the workplace, we hear of so many ex-players who end up with bankruptcy and addiction issues and depression and dying young and all this. So it's more than just concussions with these class action laws. I think it's player welfare in general. It's not that collision injuries and contact injuries will happen. It's not that. It's how we look after the players when they are on the injury sidelines, when they are under the team doctor's care, when they are sidelined through injury, the rehabilitation process, making sure that it is done at a pace that is acceptable and right, and not rushing players back when they're clearly not fully fit. The fact that Kalen Ponga, for example, who's a high-profile rugby league player, has had 2 concussions in the first 2 games of this season, has gone to the US to seek a specialist treatment is concerning. The fact that Boyd Courtner and Jake Friend for the Roosters had to retire, I'm going to say about 3 to 5 years earlier than they should have because of repeat concussions. The fact that both the Morris twins, they had bad leg injuries right at the end, and they had to retire, I think, a little bit earlier than they would have wanted to. we look at what's gone on in rugby union with some players who've had a lot of concussions, and like Pat Lambie was one of my favourite players. Same age as me. He retired before he was 30. He was done, and he cited concussion as a major part of why he retired. And you can see up before the major concussions and after, he's a different player. He's clearly not right, and they clearly rushed him back into play. That's the team doctors, both in South Africa and France, and the clubs he was playing at, rushed him back into play when he was clearly not right to do so. We've seen several rugby players have motor neuron disease, such as East van der Westhuizen and Doddy Weir and Rob Burrow in rugby league. There has to be a causal link with blows to the head and MND. Um, we've seen multiple ice hockey players, American football players, die young, and then we find out about CTE. It's not that the concussions are going to happen. It's making sure that if there is a concussion, what I've seen at this weekend is the team physio comes on because the player's concussed, right? They've deemed him fit to continue, whereas in a couple of phases of play later in the independent doctor says you're off. Yes, I watched that. The blunt force trauma to his chest. He didn't die, obviously, but he had it was the concussive impact of the chest shot that he got hit in the chest. It was a very innocuous challenge, and he just keeled over. You can have that where the shot going through the body can knock your heart out of rhythm. And again, there was one with a quarterback as well, who had a few nasty head knocks, and then there was the debate around the independent doctors and the independent protocols, and the NFL was made to look very, very stupid. But no, player welfare is vital and key, because without the players, you don't have the game. And like, I love the fact that it's a brutal contact sport. I do. They are warriors, but at the same time, we have to temper some of this with as I say, it's not the brutality on the field; it's the looking after the players off the field. I do think some sports are being very reactionary in some of their rule changes. The problem is some of these sports have allowed bad habits and bad techniques to evolve, and the enforcement of the rules has been really, really poor. Um, you know how what what crazy the best, I can say that very lightly, time to have a chest shock is on a professional football field because you get immediate medical treatment. Yes. Now, what is interesting is the Italians have brought in a policy where if you have a heart condition, you cannot play professional sport. You have to go for further scans. So if something, you have to have these medicals. So if you're a football player, a rugby player, an ice hockey player, when you sign before you actually officially sign for a club, you have to have a medical, and a very intense one. And it's not just like, oh, can you run? That the other the medicals we get here. No, you go in for a full scan, and they check your heart. The amount of players who've had their contracts ripped up because they've been told you've got to retire. You've got a heart problem. Like Manuel Almunia, people mock Manuel Almunia when he was in Arsenal, mock the goalkeeper, but he was about to sign for Cagliari, I believe, in Serie A, and he was going through his medical, and the medical came back, and the independent and the team doctor said, "Can you come with us, please? We found something. You've got a massive heart problem. Um, you could die. Like you could have a heart attack. We can't risk you. You're going to have to retire. But we found it, so we're going to save your life." Manuel Almunia was found to have a massive heart issue through his medical, and it had gone on. So the Italian medicals, when you go to sign for a professional sports team, the Italian system is so rigorous. Apparently, it's saved so many lives. It has saved countless lives. Why don't we have that same strict medical here? Yes, we have sports medicals, but we don't scan for heart problems. The Italian system has been credited with reducing fatalities by, is it 20 to 80% or something? I think it depends on the study you look at, but the Italian system, with their very, very strict full body medical. They check everything. They do proper scans on everything. Has saved lives. And I think other nations and leagues need to look at the Italian system because that would avoid a Christian Eriksen. Even though he was an Inter player, um, they have regular medical, regular every season. Everyone has to go through a medical. And whatever caused that, well, I think it was a bacterial infection. But the Fabrice Muamba, the Mark Vivian Foe, Daily Blind, another one, their heart problems would have been detected a lot sooner, and then the appropriate treatment could have been given that would have avoided their health issues on and off the field, and obviously Mark Vivian Foe died. But that's something that's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting is how strict the Italian system is with medicals when it comes to player welfare. It's partly to do with insurance. They've got an insurance law as well. So it's like workplace insurance. And no insurance carrier under the current Italian system will cover you if you've got a heart defect as a professional athlete. You will not be covered for health insurance or company insurance. You will not be covered. You will not be able to get private insurance either. They have some it's very, very strict. And then you can obviously get the required medical diagnosis and the required health treatment to control. It could be an irregular heartbeat. That is enough to have your contract terminated and you are put on medical retirement. So I could not play professional football or rugby in Italy, for example, because I have a heart murmur. Automatically, I would fail the medical. So that's something that needs to be considered. Why don't other countries adopt the very strict Italian system? And people are going, it's amazing that Eriksen's playing and Daily Blind's playing and Fabrice Muamba's still alive. However, yes, medical science has massively improved from what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Massively improved. But the Italian system has been proven to have saved more lives than having defibrillators at the game. It's simple. Putting athletes through these very, very rigorous and strict medicals with their best interests at heart. Sod the contract, sod playing best interests at heart. And also protecting the club or the league as well from any potential litigation. Very, very strict. But it has been proven also to save lives. And I think the doctor who agreed it with the Italian government who brought in this legislation, he says, I'm surprised more professional sports leagues and countries around the world don't have something similar. He's stunned that Italy is the only one. It's like, how can Italy be a world leader in public health? Like, seriously, he's like, what? But it's true. It is true. But yeah, it is obviously a bit crazy. The best place to have a medical emergency is ironically at a professional professional sports game. Yes, it is. But no, it's very interesting. We've never really got onto the concussion side of things as much. And when I do the content on player welfare, the views aren't there. People aren't interested. They want to see those athletes go out on a field or on a rink or on a court, beat the crap out of each other for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long the match lasts. And if they're playing through injury, oh, it's a heroic thing. It's and in reality, a lot of these players are playing when they shouldn't be. There's manageable injuries, and then there's ones that you're going to be in a wheelchair. And then you got to think about post playing. What happens? Because a lot of players retire, and they all go into real estate. They go into construction. They go into the everyday jobs that I also have, and they just get on with life. Others will stay within the sport in a coaching or ambassadorial role, or they'll go into the media, but they'll go into that. And others just really, really struggle to adapt either to mainstream life or staying within the sports industry. They really can't cope. And a lot of it's to do with all the injuries they've suffered, the fact that they can't hold on a job for health reasons because their bodies are broken. They've developed addictions to painkillers because of the pain. Their whole some of these stories, and people are going, oh, but they earn all this money when they're professional. Not every professional athlete earns mega millions like your LeBron James or your Ronaldo's or your Messi. Most of them earn a little bit more than what I do. Yeah, admittedly in a week, but their careers are notoriously short, and they also have bills to pay, and they have mortgages, kids to feed. In reality, they don't get a lot of professional athletes aren't as well compensated for as we think. The superstars really inflate what average salaries are. Now, in certain sports, yes, you could argue in football, for example, and basketball, the salaries are all over the place, right? In European football and in NBA basketball, the salaries are ridiculous. You could argue that. You could definitely argue that they're out of control. But then you look at your rugby league, your ice hockey, baseball, some of these other sports. The average salary and the league minimum salaries that are in place are actually really low, really, really low. And some careers at top level only last a couple of years, and you might, before tax, earn a couple of $1 million or a couple of £1 million, and then you're done. That's before tax. So unless you've got a really good accountant and a really good investment broker, you are going to struggle financially if your career is very, very short. So there's that. Anyway, I'm going to call that a day for now. I will keep up to date on any more breaking sports news. Obviously, Leicester are looking for a new manager. Chelsea are looking for a new manager. Tottenham have obviously got an interim manager in place, but are also looking for a permanent replacement. Conte. Everton's ongoing financial fair play breach. Man City's ongoing financial fair play breach. So there are things continuing in professional sport that I can continue to look at. But for me, for now, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all your questions, and I'll have some more content for you very, very soon.